The debate between Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, representing the Democrats, and Senator JD Vance of Ohio, representing the Republicans, showcased a sharp contrast in their visions for America's future. The debate, held in a critical moment during an election cycle with early voting already underway in 20 states, focused on a variety of issues from foreign policy and national security to climate change, immigration, and domestic challenges such as housing and gun control. The debate began with the situation in the Middle East. Both candidates discussed the recent escalation involving Iran and Israel. Walz emphasized the need for stable leadership, criticizing former President Donald Trump as erratic and unfit to lead in such a crisis. He supported the current administration's policies, highlighting Vice President Harris's steady leadership and advocating for continued partnership with allies like Israel. On the other hand, Vance framed Trump's previous presidency as a time of stability and strength, asserting that Trump's policies kept adversaries in check, using a philosophy of peace through strength. Vance criticized the current administration's actions towards Iran, particularly referencing the $100 billion in unfrozen assets that allegedly bolstered Iran's military capacity, emphasizing that a preemptive strike by Israel should be supported if necessary for security. Next, the candidates addressed the climate crisis, especially in the context of Hurricane Helen, which had caused significant destruction. Walz argued that climate change was making natural disasters more frequent and severe, and touted the achievements of the Harris administration in investing in clean energy, creating jobs, and reducing carbon emissions. He specifically mentioned projects like electric vehicle technology development in Ohio and the establishment of the largest solar manufacturing plant in North America in Minnesota. Vance, while expressing sympathy for those affected by the hurricane, argued that the best way to tackle climate change was to boost American energy production and bring manufacturing back to the United States. He was skeptical of the Democrats' approach to climate change, suggesting that overseas energy production, especially in places like China, contributed more to carbon emissions, and thus, resuming energy independence at home was a more effective solution. On immigration, Vance pushed for drastic actions, proposing the largest mass deportation plan in American history and advocating for militarization to curb illegal immigration. He criticized Vice President Harris's handling of the border, blaming her policies for the influx of drugs like fentanyl and the overwhelming number of illegal crossings, which he argued affected housing affordability and placed strain on American infrastructure. He aimed to prioritize deportation starting with criminals and described Kamala Harris's open border policies as irresponsible and chaotic. In contrast, Walz defended Harris's immigration policies, highlighting her experience as the Attorney General of California, a border state, and her efforts to address transnational crime. He accused Trump of using immigration as a political weapon rather than working towards real solutions. Walz also promoted a bipartisan approach, referencing a bill developed by Democratic and Republican legislators, which aimed to add more border agents, streamline asylum processing, and establish a more humane immigration system. The candidates also debated the pressing economic issue of affordable housing. Walz described Harris's plan to address the housing shortage through the construction of 3 million new homes, down payment assistance for first-time buyers, and expanding tax credits. He emphasized the need to view housing as a fundamental right and not as a mere asset to be exploited, pointing out that these measures would ultimately help stabilize families and improve community well-being. Vance, on the other hand, criticized Harris for not acting on housing issues during her time in office, arguing that high home prices were driven in part by the surge in illegal immigration, which increased competition for limited housing resources. He also discussed plans to seize federal lands for housing development, though Walz countered that many of these lands had significant environmental and cultural importance, which should be protected rather than exploited. The debate continued with a discussion on gun violence, which is the leading cause of death among children and teens in the United States. Vance opposed most gun control legislation, including red flag laws and bans on assault weapons like the AR-15. He argued that most gun violence was committed using illegally obtained firearms and highlighted the need to enhance school security, such as reinforcing school infrastructure and increasing the presence of school resource officers. Vance noted that the Harris administration's open border policies had allowed a surge of illegal firearms into the country, worsening the gun violence epidemic. Walz, however, made an emotional appeal, referencing the tragic experiences of families affected by school shootings. He supported enhanced background checks and red flag laws, pointing out that Minnesota had implemented similar measures to great effect. He stressed the importance of addressing the root causes of gun violence rather than merely hardening schools, and criticized the NRA's influence in obstructing meaningful research and legislation on gun safety. On reproductive rights, the candidates offered divergent views. Walz attacked Trump's involvement in overturning Roe v. Wade and highlighted the impacts of restrictive abortion laws, such as the story of Amanda Zarofsky in Texas, who suffered severe health complications due to the inability to access timely abortion care. He argued that women's health care decisions should be left to women and their doctors, not politicians, and touted Minnesota's restoration of Roe's protections. Walz warned of the GOP's potential future policies, including creating pregnancy registries and restricting access to contraceptives and infertility treatments, framing them as a broader threat to reproductive freedoms. Vance, in response, expressed a more nuanced position, acknowledging the difficulty of the issue. He highlighted the need for the Republican Party to regain public trust on reproductive rights and expressed a desire for more supportive policies for families, such as accessible child care and fertility treatments. He framed abortion as a state-level issue, arguing that democracy should allow individual states to make their own decisions on the matter, given the country's diversity. When pressed, Vance denied supporting a federal pregnancy monitoring system, calling it a misrepresentation of his views. The debate moved on to the issue of qualifications and character. Moderator Margaret Brennan questioned Walz about discrepancies in his public statements regarding his time in China during the Tiananmen Square protests, suggesting potential inaccuracies. Walz admitted to misspeaking about the specific timeline but emphasized his intent and focus on international understanding, which he had sought to foster by leading youth exchanges to China. He acknowledged that he was imperfect but committed to serving his community honestly. Vance was also challenged regarding his shifting views on Donald Trump. In 2016, Vance had been highly critical of Trump, but since then, he had become one of his staunchest supporters. Vance explained his change in stance by acknowledging his earlier misunderstandings of Trump's leadership and citing the achievements of Trump's administration, such as a strong economy and effective foreign policy. He positioned himself as a loyal yet honest vice presidential candidate who would not hesitate to voice his disagreements. As the debate wound down, the candidates discussed the economy. Walz defended Harris's economic plan, which included middle-class tax cuts, affordable health care, and expanded social programs like a renewed child tax credit. He argued that these initiatives would be funded by asking the wealthiest Americans to pay their fair share, contrasting this approach with Trump's previous tax cuts, which he claimed had primarily benefited the wealthy and increased the national deficit. Vance responded by promoting Trump's record on economic growth, touting low inflation, high wages, and a secure energy sector under Trump's leadership. He criticized Harris for not implementing effective policies to control inflation and noted that the current administration's policies had led to skyrocketing costs in housing, groceries, and energy. Vance also emphasized the importance of reducing America's dependency on foreign manufacturing and energy production, promising to bring jobs and industry back to the United States. thereby boosting the economy and ensuring national security. The debate was a showcase of the candidates' different perspectives on how to manage both domestic and international challenges. Walz and Vance both presented themselves as champions of the working class, but their methods of achieving security, prosperity, and social stability were vastly different, reflecting their respective party ideologies. Walz focused on government intervention, renewable energy, and social programs to address inequity and provide security, whereas Vance leaned heavily on American exceptionalism, deregulation, and nationalist policies to create what he described as a stable and strong America. The debate ended without a clear consensus, demonstrating the ongoing political divide in the country. Both candidates tried to appeal to voters' fears and hopes, with Walz pushing for community and inclusiveness, while Vance emphasized strength, deterrence, and traditional values. Each of their visions for America presented a choice between two very different paths for the nation's future. Both candidates demonstrated their strengths and offered clear paths for addressing issues, but I believe each of them had some weaknesses. Arguments and positions. Tim Walz presented himself as an advocate of stability and consistent leadership. He emphasized the importance of alliances and cooperation, especially in the context of international conflicts such as the situation in Iran and Israel. His positions on issues like climate change, affordable housing, and gun control underscored the need for investment and social responsibility. He actively defended the achievements of the Harris administration, drawing on tangible accomplishments like major investments in clean energy and infrastructure. Walz also skillfully appealed to voters' emotions by sharing stories of specific people affected by issues such as lack of access to health care or abortion restrictions, which gave his arguments a more human dimension. JD Vance, on the other hand, focused on a return to Trump-era policies and claimed that the philosophy of peace through strength was the key to international stability. He promoted the idea of tax cuts and expanding American energy independence, asserting that these measures would collectively return the economy to the golden times under Trump, when, according to him, inflation was low and incomes were high. Vance repeatedly criticized the current administration for its weak handling of border security, blaming its policies for a surge in illegal immigration and the fentanyl crisis, which he argued hurt American citizens and drove up housing costs. Who won? JD Vance appeared more energetic and emotionally resonant, particularly when he spoke about the need to protect the borders and improve economic conditions for the middle class. He wasn't afraid to criticize the Harris administration, which could be convincing for an audience that shares his perspective on more conservative policies. Vance also addressed topics that could cause concern for voters, such as mass deportation and border control, demonstrating strong resolve and determination. However, Tim Walz seemed more thoughtful and deliberate, with his statements being more grounded in facts and the results of the current administration. Walz emphasized investments in infrastructure, energy, and sustainable development, which highlighted his focus on progress and improving quality of life. His stance on abortion and women's rights appeared more humane, whereas Vance somewhat softened his positions, which could leave an impression of inconsistency. Who left the best impression? This largely depends on the audience's perspective. If we evaluate the candidates based on their emotional impact and ability to appeal to a sense of security and national pride, Vance likely succeeded more among the conservative part of the electorate. His confidence and emphasis on old-fashioned values, such as national security and American energy independence, may have resonated with Trump supporters. On the other hand, Tim Walz left the impression of a more balanced, pragmatic leader striving for development through long-term investments and stabilization. His arguments sounded more rational and were supported by concrete examples of already achieved successes, which could make a strong impression on voters seeking more calm and predictable leadership. Overall conclusion. The winner of the debate depends on voter priorities. For those who value decisiveness and aggressive rhetoric, JD Vance appeared more convincing. However, Tim Walz, with his stability, focus on results, and pragmatic plans, likely won the hearts of those who seek a more measured and thoughtful leader.